Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. My guest on the show today is Jonathan, CEO and founder of Scribble Maps. Jonathan's actually been on the podcast before. Last time we were discussing the business of web maps, and you'll find a link to that episode in the show notes. This time I asked Jonathan on the show to talk about Scribble, a multilingual agent that he's built for Scribble Maps. So far it has access to 140 tools. It can view your map while you're working on it, build plugins, and fetch data. But it's also a full onboarding and sales agent, as well as helping to educate users and send them through the sales pipeline. So that's what it says on the box of this Scribble Maps agent. But why should you care? Well, I think you should care because we're going to see more and more of these things. I think it's worth understanding how they're built, their limitations, what they're capable of, and who's using them. Because for a lot of people, this is going to be the way they interact with geospatial data. And perhaps not just geospatial data, but all sorts of different kinds of data. I don't think we can put the genie back in the bottle. And personally, I'm not entirely sure I would if I could. I think it's a pretty exciting time. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of uncertainty around what these things can do, how they're going to work, and how they're going to impact us. And I get that. I feel it too. But we simply can't afford to stick our heads in the sand and pretend like it's not happening. So that's why I invited Jonathan on the show to help demystify agents or chatbots that are going to be the interface to geospatial data and operations. Just a few quick notes from me before we get started. During the episode, Jonathan talks about a language that's called, I think it's actually pronounced Loiban. There'll be a link to that in the show notes as well. Check it out if you're interested. And this is a logical constructed human language created by the Logical Language Group, which aims to be completely unambiguous. Well, it doesn't get much more exciting than that, right? If you're interested, again, check out the show notes. Jonathan also mentioned a MCP server for QGIS. Again, links in the show notes. Check it out. I haven't had a time to play with it yet. I've seen a few reviews of it and it looks fascinating. Okay, that's it from me. Let's hear from Jonathan and his new multilingual agent called Scribble. Hey Jonathan, welcome back to the podcast. You are the CEO and founder of Scribble Maps. You've actually been on the podcast before. I hope you remember. I certainly do. I'll put a link to that in the show notes of this episode. But this time around, I want to talk about the agent that you've just built into Scribble Maps. And I think this is a really important discussion to have because we're seeing more and more agents around the place, especially when we think about geospatial. So I really want to get a bit of your background first, just to give the listener, a bit of context, and then sort of move on and talk about this agentic workflow that you've built into Scribble Maps. Would you mind just giving us a brief introduction? I've said you're the CEO of Scribble Maps. Tell us a little bit about Scribble Maps. What is it? Who's it for? How long have you been working on it?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me back, especially after your hiatus. Scribble Maps been around for 15 years. We're kind of like a horizontal multi-use web GIS platform, and we have 10 to 15,000 users a day, roughly.
And what are those users doing? Like, who is it? What are they doing on the platform? Who is the platform for?
A lot of different use cases. We have people doing site selection. We have people doing drafting, post-drafting, post-mapping, sales territory mapping, construction, all the usual suspects when it comes to GIS.
Relatively data-heavy users you've got? Are you seeing people show up with a ton of data and putting it into Scribble Maps?
No, our platform is more targeted at like the mid-range data. So instead of the really, really big data, it's more, within like probably the 20 to 200 meg range.
Are the users that you're talking about, are they users or are they admin that are working? Have you got 15,000 people that are administrating accounts and have a whole bunch of other users using those accounts, or is this 15,000 users across the entire platform?
No, so we have about 10,000 a day. Actual, like how many of those are managers? We have some enterprises that have, over 50, 60 seats, but probably by and large, our biggest users are probably small and medium-sized businesses. So will just be sometimes just an individual that's using us to do some mapping.
Thank you. I really appreciate the context. And this agentic interface that you've built, how are you referring to that? Are you simply calling it a chatbot, or how do you refer to it in Scribble Maps?
We call it Scribble. That's its official name. It's Scribble.
Great. Okay, Scribble. And is this for everyone, or is it for very specific use cases?
It's pretty much for everyone, and it's growing. It has access to, I would say, right now, 80% of the platform it can access the tools for. It is for everyone, but so far we're seeing it's mostly being used by newer users.
Okay. My understanding is that this hasn't been live very long. It's a relatively new feature. Why now? Has there been a technology shift that's made this possible to implement? Are people asking for it? Why have you created this and implemented it now?
It's a little bit interesting. So a couple months ago, I found out my wife was expecting, and she does a lot of the onboarding and customer education. And so I kind of sat down and I was like, can I have AI do this, or do I need to bring on another staff or employee? And I ran some tests, and I'm like, I think I can do this. I think I can make something that's really quite intensive. It's still early innings. I don't know. This could be a huge risk for a variety of reasons, but I'm pretty confident that it's going to have a huge impact.
What are the risks?
One of the biggest risks right now is there was a study done that pretty much including AI in your product is perceived as making the product cheap, which is interesting because a lot of companies are slapping AI powered on everything, despite the studies saying, yeah, you really shouldn't do this. And a lot of this is fueled by bigger companies kind of jamming AI into their systems that isn't really useful or just gets in the way, or you can't disable it or turn it off. And so that's kind of led to kind of a poisoning of the well, so to speak, of injecting AI into the tool.
Yeah, is there a danger that people just think this is like a thin wrapper around OpenAI's model?
It's a huge risk. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges we're facing because a lot of the AI out there are just chatbots, whereas, Scribble actually interacts with the interface, will select tools, can pull in data. It does a lot of different things. It can even email you information on your map. And most chatbots don't do that. So that's actually one of the struggles we're having is just people are assuming it's just a chatbot.
Yeah, I could imagine because they can't see that it's interacting with the Scribble environment. Well, I'm sure they can in some ways, but they don't know that Scribble is providing the magic underneath. And if they make the mistake of thinking this is just a wrapper on top of ChatGPT, well, why don't I just go there and use that?
I mean, one of the differences is, and I don't use GPT, I use Gemini, is that it talks to you, right? And you can talk to it. So it has a full voice. So instead of just delivering text messages, it will actually talk to you as you're using it. And then you can actually talk directly to it instead of typing to it. So that's one of the reasons I went with Gemini, that and it's cheaper than OpenAI.
Is another risk the privacy? We just talked about access before and that it could use these different tools and even email you. Are there privacy concerns around this?
Yes. So according to with Google, and I'm using Vertex, they don't use the data for training. But what we do is we don't provide any map data to it, with one exception. If you ask for I want it to build a plugin or I want you to filter on something, we'll actually send just the attribute column names to the AI so it can pick the right one. And then the other one is if you choose a kind of a neat feature is that if you allow it, it can actually view your screen. So it can suggest colors and tell you what you're looking at. In that situation, yeah, then we're sending an image to, the Vertex Gemini API, but you have to give it a lot of permission, and it works like a video conference. So you kind of know it would happen, and we have another setting to block it. So it is a big concern. So we have a privacy thing, and that's another risk, especially working with map data. People will look at it as oh, I don't want to use this because of privacy. So that is also a big concern.
It's interesting you mentioned screen sharing there. So I've used as a Google AI Studio. Fascinating. It's amazing what you can do on there. I've tried this share screen before, and I'm not the world's most amazing cartographer. So I had a map open in QGIS. It's like, hey, can you help me make this beautiful? It was a really interesting experience.
Yeah. So in Scribble Maps, one of the first things I built was kind of an AI map styler. So you could say, make the map look like Christmas, or you could pretty much anything you could think of, and then it would style it. And over time, when I first used Google, it was really, really bad. And now it's really, really good. And it almost solves map styling because you can type in anything you want, low contrast, high contrast. I want an editorial map, and it will create that style. And what's interesting with Scribble is it also now has progressive styling. So after that, you can say, I just want the roads to be dark blue or pink or black. I want the labels removed, and it will instantly do it.
I want to sort of dive deeper into the functionality in just a minute. But is there any memory involved with this? Can it remember styles? Will it get to know me as a user of Scribble Maps?
It's not entirely a goldfish. We have a pretty small limit. So it's probably not going to like build a relationship with you. And that's a little bit on purpose. We really kind of want to keep people on track. We don't want people have it going off on and making a friend AI substitute in Scribble Maps. That's not our business. It does have some memory, but not that much memory.
Interesting. I was thinking, obviously, not for more of the companion side of things, but I was thinking of if I was going to have a AI assistant in Scribble Maps, maybe it might be useful if Daniel likes this style here, or the last time we made these roads, we used these defaults to color them as the symbology, that kind of thing.
We might add so you can add those kinds of memories and states in the future. We already have a template system, so you can generate a template and you kind of load it up. We're not really focused on that right now. Right now, we're just mostly focused on making sure it works somewhat reliably.
That's another topic I want to talk about in just a minute. But before we get there, tell me a little bit about like what it can do. We talked about styling maps, that kind of thing. Does it have access to geoprocessing as well? You also mentioned filtering data. Can you give me a bit of an understanding of all the functionality that this thing has access to?
It would be a lot to go over, but I'll go over some of the major. Number one, almost all the tools it has access to. For instance, if you say I want to use the draw tool or the zipper tool, it will immediately select it for you. If you say I need to import a list, it will open the panel for you. If you want to say I want to filter on some attribute that greater than 1,000, it will do that. You can say I want all the building footprints for a polygon, it will reach out to fetch them. I want the population for a polygon, it will fetch it. Actually, just today, I'm implementing data commons, so for any point, you'll be able to say what's the mortality rate, and it will also have access to Wikipedia. So it does a lot of data fetching as well.
Can it string together these different commands?
It has 130 tools, actually 140, and it's because of AI programming. I'm probably putting on anywhere from 2 to 5 a day right now, based on user feedback. But what's really kind of interesting is as I add more tools, sometimes it surprises me. And I'll give an example early on. If Scribble can't do something, it goes to and checks our full documentation to kind of give the user steps. One time I hadn't built something. It was like just switching between imperial metrics, something really simple. And I said, okay, I want to switch to imperial. And I hadn't built the tool yet. So it went to the docs. It looked the docs and then it brought it back and then it realized that it was in the UI settings panel and then it just used that tool to bring up the UI settings panel. And it was it caught me off guard because now looking at it, oh, that makes perfect sense. But essentially it went to the documentation, figured something out, and then used the tools it had to satisfy the request.
Does that mean then this is a combination of a RAG model retrieval, augmented generation, and an MCP server that is connecting to the tools?
Actually, it doesn't use MCP at all. It's probably one of the biggest client-side implementations. Now, it will have the ability, I'm building it to actually add it in your own MCP servers. So once they're added, you'll be able to, if it's there, you can say, hey, Scribble, do this, and it will actually reach out to another MCP server and pull in data. But it's itself not an MCP server. It's just a kind of like a front-end implementation.
I just got to understand this. Does that mean in the future I could create an MCP server? I could create a very, very specialized tool, and I don't know if you have some kind of app store thing in Scribble Maps and put it in there that people could use.
Yeah, actually, and if anyone has one right now and they want to, we're verifying them all. We're going to have the ability to just select from a list, and then you'll have kind of like a customer, like a developer mode where you'll be able to add in your own MCP. So we're kind of hoping that Scribble could be like kind of the front for a lot of these geospatial tools.
Yeah, cool. Why did you decide not to use MCP as a protocol?
Well, MCP is really just kind of like a synonym for like an API endpoint, and we didn't need to use it in this case. So, in order to kind of interact with all the tools, it goes to Gemini. Gemini has the config, and then it sends back a tool call, and then the tool call is just executed with inside the app. So there doesn't really need to be an MCP server.
Okay. Yeah, cool. That makes a lot of sense. How do you deal with quality assurance? Like, how do you know that it's going to do the thing that it's supposed to do? How do you test that?
Man, so yeah, reliability is a huge issue. I won't give away all the secret sauce. I've managed to probably improve reliability by 30 or 40%, but there's a lot of like specific issues. I'll give away one, and that is you have to pretty much force the agent to always speak in English. And the reason for this is your config or your tools are often going to be defined in English. So something as simple as respond to the language that the user talks to you only, that might actually interfere with the tool usages if the tool usages are English, because we'll say, well, I can't call these tools because they're English. And it's very simplistic, but so we have multilingual support and we only do it on the front end, because if we try to do it on the back end, we notice the tool stopped working. In terms of quality assurance, this is another really interesting challenge. So we and I'll give an example. Hey, Scribble, I want to draw a red polygon. So what we want it to do is change the tool's colors to red and then select the polygon tool so you can draw a red polygon. It does that maybe 90% of the time, and then maybe 95% of the time. And then 5% of the time, for whatever reason, it will select the tools or set the colors or select the tool, and then it will tell you how to do the other thing. For instance, it will set the colors to red, and then instead of actually selecting the polygon tool, it will go, okay, now select the polygon tool in the toolbar. And, we try to there's ways to fix that using samples, and, we're going to do more fine tuning, but you can never really stop that. So we kind of really focus. It's like, okay, 90% of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, we want it to do what we want. And then the remaining time we kind of want it to be in the ballpark. And then if we identify something that's way off, then we really try to invest time to fix that. But there's other weird situations. For instance, my QA tester was working on it and he reported a bug and says, well, Scribble was saying there's an emoji tool, and there's no emoji tool in Scribble Maps. And then I said, well, there kind of is, because the way the marker tool works is it by default picks an emoji. And I said, and AI can infer something. So there's not necessarily a marker tool in Scribble Maps, but AI will figure out, it's like, well, there's a pencil tool, or there's a freehand tool, there's a pen tool. And so AI will sometimes just infer, and you want it to, what the user means. And so that also makes the whole situation even more complex.
It's really interesting. In some of my own experimentations with building tools on top of AI models, I've run into huge problems in changing a model. Have you discovered that? Like when you update, so if Gemini, whatever version you're using, if you want to update that, do you anticipate that that there'll be a lot more, quality assurance issues, or will you need to go back and check everything again?
Man, I hope not. I hope that, I'm assuming I'm Gemini 2.5 right now, and it goes to Gemini 3.0, and everything just gets smarter. That's the hope. But yes, if we do upgrade the model, we would have to do some kind of unit testing where we run through the different phrases that people might use for each and every single tool and make sure that it executes the right tool inside of Scribble Maps.
Will you be able to look at logs or user sort of interactions from the past to create that sort of test process?
Right now in preview, we are logging pretty much everything. So once we leave preview, we won't be logging everything. So we know what people are asking us right now. What we'll probably end up doing is using common phrases and then actually using the LLM to generate variations of that phrase in the way people might talk about it to do the testing. So for, say, select a polygon, we'll have AI produce maybe 30, 40 variations of that, and then run that to try to see if it does the correct function calling.
Yeah, interesting. Is this a situation where you have agents talking to agents, or is this just one agent doing everything in the background?
Yeah, so Scribble is the conductor, and then we have probably around 5 or 6 other agents. So I have an agent for map styling, I have an agent for building plugins, I have an agent for looking up documentation. And so if Scribble's a 0 degree, then the next agent would be the 1st degree. And that's an interesting challenge because you need the other agents to kind of have also a running memory. And the main reason you split it up is it has to do with context and cost. For instance, building a custom plugin, there's a ton of examples and documentation that all goes into the context, and you don't all want that all sitting there in the main context. So you really have to use these kind of nth degree agents so that you just don't have a ton of info just sitting in your primary context. But at the same time, when Scribble talks to one of these other agents, the agent needs to keep a memory. Otherwise, you kind of get this telephone effect.
What does this mean for speed in terms of execution when you're having agents talk to other agents?
It's pretty quick. I mean, the main challenges when building that is kind of having a trade off between performance and speed. So you're picking different models. We have certain situations where we'll actually kind of figure out if the user is struggling, say with plugin development, we'll kick up the model to try and solve the issue if the one of the lower end models aren't providing the correct answer.
So I've had a little bit of experience playing around with Claude Code. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but one of the really interesting things about it is you can do exactly what you're talking about. You have an orchestrator agent, and you can create these other agents. And it's fascinating watching the handoff, the way it just figures out, oh, I've got to go over here now. Yeah, to see that take place. But I have no experience with going beyond that sort of 1st degree where I have an orchestrator agent that has in your case, the map styling agent that has 2 or 3 other agents underneath it. What kind of new problems could I solve if I started adding more agents to this sort of reasoning chain?
The main reason you would do it instead of just including everything in one agent is to save money, is so that the contexts are smaller and smaller. But as the degrees go up, you have the memory issue that happens because you're not going to save money if you're transferring all the memory between all of them. And you also need, like, past the 1st degree, you need them to start being a little chatty. And it gets really challenging because if like the second one's like, oh, I need this information, and then the first one says, okay, here's this information back, and then the second one's like, well, that's not correct, send it back. They can actually get stuck in a loop. And this is even between, my N0 with Scribble and my agent. Sometimes this will happen. It's a challenge because you have to like fight sometimes these kind of loops that will happen.
So a lot of talk around LLMs is revolving around this idea of hallucination. And I realize we touched on it before when you were talking about, oh, it says we've got an icon tool, but you don't. Oh, but you do, because you have other tools that are represented by icons. Have you had any major problems with hallucinations in your system?
Yes, it is a challenge, right? So early on, the less tools I have, I had more problems. The more tools I add, that the hallucinations go down. But when I was just starting, it would go off on random tangents about how things should work in Scribble maps when like it was completely wrong. Like it was just trying to guess how the UX would work. As I add more tools, that's becoming, less and less of an issue. And after adding like the kind of the documentation check, it seems to be do it less. But yeah, there's always this risk that sometimes it will say something that's completely wrong. And this is a huge issue, especially with onboarding and sales. If it says it can't do something, it can. That could be a huge issue, and vice versa. It says it can do something that can't. That would also anger people. But we figure, it's better that people get some education than no education, right? Than just leaving the website. Because right now, if you think about if you arrive on a big website, the onboarding, there's only so many options. You have like the webinars, you have the videos, and then you have kind of those interactive tours that everyone closes immediately and then regrets because they can't find anything. But the difference with AI is AI, even a reasonable system, can kind of like point you to everything in the platform. And I think this is a really big game changer for customer education. Because if someone, and we're seeing it just in the last week, comes to the platform and they'll ask questions like, can I import a shapefile? How do I import a list? How do I saw one, how do I create a negative buffer? And then it can do that for them. And so that's, instead of them having to dig for videos or look through documentation, Scribble can just point them in the right direction.
Yeah, to be honest, and I'm looking for this more and more when I visit big websites. I'm getting less and less interested in crawling around the website, using their normally pretty poor search functionality and trying to find an article that I'm looking for or the right keyword or the whatever. More and more, I'm looking for a chatbot. And if I can't find it, more and more, I'm taking that link and putting it into a chatbot and saying, can you just search this for me? Can you filter this information for me? And the vast majority of the time, it does a much better job than I would have done. So my expectation is this is going to be more of an expectation. People are going to be looking for this more and more and more. I just want to circle back to something you said. You mentioned at the start, when you had less tools, it was more likely to hallucinate. And then you added more tools and the hallucinations sort of go away or a significant less than what there was. Is that simply because you've got a tighter definition of what is possible and how things work?
Yes. So the more tools there are, it's more likely to pick the right one. The other thing that we realize is defining limitations is also just as important as defining what it can do. For example, AI is not really at the point where it can really draw for you. Like if you're looking at something on your screen and it looks at your screen, it's like, I want that traced. It can't really do that yet. So in that situation, if someone's like, trace this thing on my screen, Scribble will say, I can't draw for you, but I can provide you the tools to do it. So defining your limitations to the AI is also just as important as defining what it can do as well.
Is that defined, or do you set those boundaries in the system prompt? Or where do you do that?
Yeah, so in the system prompt, that's probably the most important. And the other kind of big thing is that samples beat logic when it comes to LLMs. So providing samples of how it should respond to the user is far more important than trying to program it from a logical standpoint. So samples are a huge thing for getting reliability in these agents.
And again, all in the system prompt, or is this system prompt telling it like, hey, we've got a vector database over there, go and look for examples over there? And what I've experienced in the past is that system prompt can get pretty significant and can fill up a lot of the context. My understanding is that's uploaded into the context immediately. Maybe it depends on which platform you're working with, but there seems to be a trade-off between what should we put in the system prompt and what should we retrieve on demand.
Yeah, so that's a challenge, right? So in the system prompt, you want to kind of have it have a little bit of general knowledge of everything it can do. For instance, plug and develop, map styling, but you don't want to have it all there. It needs to be kind of the general purpose, the GP, and then it goes out to the expert agents that have really big system prompts focused solely on that. And the other way you can get around big system prompts, and we haven't really done that, is through, fine tuning. That's where you submit a bunch of potential questions and then how it would respond. And that is, if you do that enough, and sometimes I'm talking about like 100,000 kind of samples, you can actually reduce the need for the system prompt. But right now, how we're doing it before that is Scribble has kind of a general knowledge of all the different agents, and then those agents have a lot of knowledge on what they're doing.
You might have heard this before, but some people think that spatial is special. Have you noticed anything special about trying to implement this kind of agentic workflow, this chatbot, in a geospatial system?
The one thing with these LLMs is that you can't really have them operate on geospatial data directly. Like it just, you can't rely on it. So if you need to, for instance, get place data, you're either converting to an SQL query or you're calling out to like a Google Places. You can't have it produce data ever. It will just hallucinate and be broken. So that's one challenge. You're always, when it comes to the spatial component, you're never going to want the AI to actually do any kind of operation on the actual spatial data.
And just to clarify, you're talking about create the data, generate the data, or decide what operation needs to happen.
Well, it has to decide what operations happens. Well, I mean, to a point, because otherwise then it wouldn't be an agent, right? Ultimately, your AI agent is always going to be some kind of router for the natural language input.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, what you're saying, this is a router, and it's deciding which tried and tested spatial functions to fire off in which order in order to achieve the goal, but it itself is not manipulating the data.
Right. So I can actually give an example. I want all the points within 50 meters of this line, right? So in that situation, you're going to create a buffer around the line, and then you're going to filter on the buffer. Sometimes it will figure that out by itself, right? Sometimes it will go through the multi-steps, but we actually are kind of building a database of samples where it actually outlines that process. So if someone asks to see points within a radius of a line, then you have to create a buffer. You have to call the buffer function, and then you have to call the filter function on that buffer after that.
Yeah. No, honestly, it makes a ton of sense. I will say, though, that in my own extremely small trials of using LLMs for different sort of geospatial processing tasks, it's been super interesting. Like text-based stuff, GeoJSON, CSV files, upload them and say, can you reproject these to that? Does a good job. Like I always check it, but I'm constantly testing things. Can you turn that GeoJSON into a KML? Maybe it's because it's text-based that it works. I don't know. But I've also had, I think it was ChatGPT create a shapefile for me. I think I might have said, you need to use Shapely for this or something. But it has been interesting sort of playing around with these tiny little small processing tasks and then sort of measuring the success. And I got to tell you, for these, again, I realize that they're very small and isolated tasks, but it does a pretty good job.
So the way that happens is that I know Gemini does it, is when you ask for that, it converts to Python code, and then it runs Python on the file and then returns you the file. The LLM itself doesn't do it. So they have these kind of isolated Python environments, and that's how it can do things like shapefiles. And I think also GPT can run GeoPandas.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. It can. Okay. So what you're saying then is it's not the LLM as such. It's again recognizing which functionality to call. It's got an environment. It's spinning up that code within the environment, executing it there, and then bringing it back.
Correct. So it's the exact same thing I do, right? So it figures out which function to call, and then it calls it inside of Scribble Maps, and then it does that, and then it returns the response.
Yeah. Now that we're talking about it, do you see like a lot of people talking about this as being an operating system? ChatGPT is an operating system, and MCP service, the ability to connect to other apps and sort of share data between them, and have agents that send off tasks to other agents, apps, perhaps have them executed, come back and sort of link things together. Do you see this as a future competitor to Scribble Maps?
Possibly. I mean, one of the reasons for developing Scribble was if someone were to kind of build like a complete competitor for Scribble Maps using AI, what it would look like. So that's kind of was like, well, I'm going to try and build it first. So that's kind of my motivation behind building this. But it's possible. But one of the big issues, and I go back to like the agents to the first, second degree, is that just like telephone, and sometimes even worse, if that tool isn't defined correctly, sometimes just randomly it will pick the wrong tool. It gets worse and worse the higher degree you go. So if one agent calls another agent, that calls another agent, calls another agent, if it doesn't have a lot of memory, it won't work. So I think there is kind of a limit to how big and complex the agentic network can be, besides just like linking in an MCP server into, say, GPT or Gemini.
Yeah, honestly, it makes a ton of sense, but I just really wanted to hear your perspective on it. There's a ton of hype around this at the moment, and it feels like everybody's running around saying this is the silver bullet for everything. And it's nice to have someone just to sort of put an expert opinion around that and say, oh, perhaps we should be thinking about these three things.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much doom and gloom and overhype right now. It's hard to know how it will play out. But personally, if you want to work with this stuff, you kind of have to accept that it's not very intelligent. That makes, and I go back to the samples versus logic. It's really samples beat logic for reliability. And one of those reasons is just because language isn't very good in general. It's very broad. And one thing I sometimes do, this is going to be out there, to try to verify clarity on my systems prompts, is there was this language that was created, was called Lojbar. And Lojbar was designed to have no assumptions in it. So what I'll have AI do is I'll translate my kind of prompts to Lojbar, and then I have it translate it back, and I do that multiple times. And then I say, okay, fix it until the English I have lines up exactly with the Lojbar, so that it kind of eliminates all assumptions and like cultural aspects that might be in the system prompt that leads it to do incorrect things.
It's really interesting. How much of an improvement have you seen by doing that?
Sometimes 5 or 10%, right? There's a lot of things in English that just you use and you don't realize that they're actually very, very, very broad. And it's not until you run it through this, you're like, oh, that makes sense, right? Again, you have to be very careful. I go back to that language thing, right? You don't respond to the user, sometimes that will link into like the tools, and then it will just stop using tools. And it was driving me crazy because when I was doing the multilingual stuff, I'm like, why is it just stopping using tools? And I realized that's what it was. So I had to force the system to always respond in English.
It's really, really interesting. So I have heard this before, and I've tried it myself. It's been interesting. Again, it's been interesting. Your results might vary. Saying things like, hey, you've got this. To the agent, take a deep breath and try again. Or, come on, you're an expert in this. You can do this. And I don't know whether it's just that extra iteration or if it actually makes a difference, but you get different results. It's quite fascinating how they respond. It also makes you realize that how random it can be. I don't want to say that word, but like inconsistent it can be.
Yeah. Well, I had an interesting an example. So Scribble has the ability to email you information. So I'll give an example. Give me some info on Toronto. And then it will say if Toronto's a vibrant city, has a population, whatever. And then you can ask Scribble, it's like, send me this conversation via email, or send me, this info to my email, right? So I asked it, I was testing it. I said, okay, give me some information about Toronto, and it spit out Toronto. And then I said, okay, you know what? I was testing, so I'm like, send me this info again. And it sent me an email, and it just said this info. And and I'm like, and then I asked, I'm like, were you like playing me or joking me? And then it just kind of like gave me like one of those sweat face icons. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm actually sending you the info now.
Funny. That's funny. Yeah. You're building the system, Scribble Maps, and you have, my guess is, a broad user base. If you're a GIS professional, a geospatial professional, having had the experience of building and working with a system like this, what would your advice be to other geospatial professionals, GIS people? Would it be like, hey, panic, this is going to come and take your job? Would it be, you should be thinking about these 5 things, learn to code, don't learn to code? Would you have any advice for people?
Did I come on a GIS podcast to say you were all doomed? The challenge is that for all of its intelligence, even if it can figure out how to use tools, if you don't really tell it and guide it, it won't necessarily do the right thing, right? So even if you look at like the Google Earth, AI reasoning, they ask it very specific questions, right? If you don't know to ask those questions, it might not offer it up. And it's the same in coding. I use this, it's probably increased my speed by 50% in terms of developing. It doesn't always act intelligently. And if you don't know how to guide it, it can go down really wrong rabbit holes. So I wouldn't be super concerned about it right now. It can definitely help people get up and running very quickly. I mean, obviously I have mine in Scribble Maps. There's the open source ones with QGIS. And I think those will help people a lot that are coming into the GIS space. But I see them more as like tools to get up and running and learning and educational than just like kind of replacing right now. And my philosophy with Scribble was I wanted it to be more like an assistant, not just do everything for you, kind of like the nurse to a surgeon. And tangentially, one of the biggest things that I was excited about was Scribble was, and I talked about this in the Lost podcast, when I started, I got so much feedback. And then over time, people got swamped with these feedback questionnaires. But Scribble, it's like my faucet has turned back on, because the way Scribble works is if you ask for something and it doesn't know or it can't do it, it says, hey, do you want to submit this as feedback? Then it immediately drops into a Slack channel, be like, hey, this user was asking for this thing. It's incredible. Like, I went from getting very little to feedback to probably like 5 or 10 feedbacks a day about how I can improve the platform. And that's one of the reasons I think that like this has, despite its sometimes not its reliability, it has legs, even just for that, just to get that feedback from what users are trying to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it also speaks to the reason why some of these bigger companies are launching browsers at the moment as well, to sort of get the feedback. What are people searching for? What do they like? What do they don't like? What do they want to use? What tasks are they struggling with? So again, thinking about GIS professionals, and thank you for the encouragement, by the way. It would have been interesting if you had said you're all doomed, give up now, but you didn't, so which is great. Would you encourage your children to learn to code? You said your wife is expecting, so my guess is it's not a problem right now. Congratulations, by the way. It's not and learning how to code for your kids is maybe not something you're really focused on right now. But like, if you had a 14, 15-year-old daughter, would you say, hey, coding is the way to go? This is a great skill to have.
It's a weird time, right? Because, the other day, my daughter saw something on YouTube and she came running to me and says, I want to be a YouTube creator. I'm like, I don't know what that's going to be like when you're, in your teens with all this video creation stuff on demand. And with coding, it's very weird for me, right? So like every day I have maybe 5 terminals open and I have these agents working on 5 features at a time, and I'm essentially just going back and reviewing them, and I have to review them. It makes silly mistakes, but I'm not even really writing code so much unless I feel I really need to, or it's not getting something, or it will just be faster than me writing the prompt. And programming is like a really good way to think, but I don't know how viable it will be when my daughter, gets to that age, or right now, because it's really hard to predict. And I really don't know what's going to happen when it comes to coding in the future.
Yeah, I'm not a coder, but I'm interested in it. Now I use AI for it. I have taught myself how to code in the past and used it a lot, but over the years it just wasn't necessary for me. So it's a skill that's kind of atrophied and it's died off. What I will say though is we're just talking about how important it is to be able to ask better questions, and I think coding, that sort of understanding of how these technologies are thinking and working, how they were logically put together, the way they interact with each other, I think is a really fast track to asking better questions. I think when you think about GIS, for example, geospatial, understanding what a raster is compared to a vector, it's a very sort of basic example, but it leads to better questions. And I think that is probably going to be still of value in the future.
Yeah, I think, in some ways, we started with binary and then we had assembly and then we had higher level languages. It's almost, AI is kind of just a higher level language. And if you can't communicate your ideas, you're still going to have a hard time building whatever it is you're building, even if you have all that power behind you. If you can't communicate, it doesn't matter.
Totally agree. One last question from my side before I let you go. What are you most excited about when you think about AI and geospatial?
Well, like the mission of Scribble Maps was, to make mapping accessible. And I think this is one of the reasons why I've invested so much time, and I hope it pays off, is it just drops the learning curve significantly for Scribble Maps. If you show up, you can just ask and it can walk you through. I think it will be exciting, the opportunities and the capabilities that will just opened up to pretty much the average person that wasn't GIS before. I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I think, again, it comes back to asking the right questions. I know that's not a very good answer, and I think there's a lot to be explored still.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm surprised that I haven't heard more people talking about democratization. That AI, these chatbot interfaces are going to democratize, blah 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 blah, everything. If you're into the startup scene, it's going to democratize everything. Yeah, I'm surprised there hasn't been more talk about that, and I can see that getting a lot more people into something like Scribble Maps, for example, making it more accessible. And on the specialist side of things, I think this idea about augmenting the work that you're already doing, like I can already see it helps me so much. There's code that I couldn't write before that I can now, things that I can implement, things that I can create, plugins for QGIS for very, very, very niche, workflows, or I can automate things that I couldn't automate before, and it happens so quickly. And also in terms of learning, so I use a bunch of different things. Mostly I jump back and forth between OpenAI and Anthropic. And oftentimes I've got a question. I don't really want to scour the internet, and I'll just talk to it, and I'll use it like a thought partner. I find you have to be a little bit careful because it can, you're a genius kind of thing. Yes, of course you're on the right track. You need to be a little bit critical about what it's coming back with. But I think that side, that augmentation, that learning ability for people that are already experts in the field, I think that's underrated and underexplored.
Yeah, it might be. I think, like, going back to the democratization point, I think one of the challenges is just some of the best data people don't have access to, right? There's certain things I'm trying to do around that to democratize it, but I think that's one of the challenges, that like some of the best data is not public, it's private. I think there's still a lot that can help people, and I think the other thing is, what do people actually need to do with mapping, right? I think a lot of the opportunity in the future with geospatial will be kind of like integrated and help people in ways they don't realize, or just kind of part of a solution, as opposed to them logging on to, say, like a Scribble Maps or any other platform and actually doing it themselves, like asking the questions. It's probably going to be a lot of like geospatial ideas kind of integrated more into, broadly into products to help people make choices.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. Back to what we were talking about previously with people, we were saying in the future people will be able to drag into these MCP services into the system and use them as customized tools. I can see that being a thing as well, where you won't necessarily know that you're calling some sort of customized geospatial tool, but it will be available, via your chat interface, and it'll just be called as it's needed. And maybe the answer isn't a map, maybe it's nothing to do with pixels, maybe it's just a yes or a no or a number, and you won't know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think even though my interface is map based, I think a lot of times maps are used when they're not needed. And I think that is one place where AI can help a lot. It just help making those decisions without a map.
Hey, Jonathan, thanks again for coming along the podcast. I really appreciate it. Always enjoy talking with you. And if anyone out there is not following you on LinkedIn, they probably should, because you're always popping up in my feed. You've always got an interesting take on things, and yeah, you're a good follow. So a little tip from me: if you're looking for a good follow on LinkedIn, you'll find a link to Jonathan's profile in the show notes of this episode. And once again, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate your time.